throughout all investigations. Operational independence underpins the rule of law and is necessary for the maintenance of public trust. The RCMP ensures that all investigative actions are appropriate to protect the integrity of the investigation and the rights of the accused individual, as well as take steps to mitigate any future harm that may occur throughout the investigation. This is a delicate balance that the RCMP faces in all of its investigative efforts. With this in mind, I would now like to share more information with the committee on the area within the RCMP that has the expertise and experience on leading these types of investigations. Le service de la police fédérale constitue une
This is an essential responsibility of the RCMP, is provided at each province and territory as well as abroad. As part of the Federal Police's mandate, the investigatory keep, which falls under the RCMP, conducts sensitive investigations which represent a threat to the economic, social safety of Canada's institutions. International investigations concerning serious allegations of corruption and financial crime under the Criminal Code and other federal statutes within the government or in its institutions.
Any criminal investigation must be protected. While subjects of investigations are sometimes known publicly, additional associates to the alleged offense are often unknown. Knowledge of the suspect, charges, or investigative strategy and techniques can lead to potential destruction of evidence, intimidation of witnesses, or prejudice to an innocent person. Any disclosure of the aforementioned component has the potential to compromise an ongoing investigation. The RCMP cannot comment on the nature or the source of the information it receives relating to ongoing investigation. In this case of ArriveCan, the RCMP can confirm that it is investigating all associated matters to determine if any criminal offense has taken place. As a means to ensuring police independence that is free from any real or perceived political influence, the RCMP is operationally independent. Police independence is an important principle in a free and democratic society that ensures that the government cannot direct or influence the actions of law enforcement, and that law enforcement decisions may remain based on the information and evidence available to police. The independence of the law enforcement is fully respected throughout all investigations. In sensitive and complex investigations, such as the ones we are investigating, the timeline of these investigations will vary depending on a myriad of factors, including matters of privilege, the number of other ongoing investigations, and available resources. As a result, the duration of these investigations can vary. Today, I'm committed to provide you as much information as possible on the investigations. Mark and I will answer your questions to the best of our ability, all the while protecting the integrity of this or any other ongoing investigation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We're going to begin our first round. Each of the first four members will have 6 minutes each. Mr. Brock, you're leading us off. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for your attendance. Commissioner, you referenced in your opening statement multiple investigations into these matters. Is this in reference to the ArriveCan issue?
There are multiple, correct, Mr. Chair, there are multiple investigations going on.
How many in total, officer?
I'd have to refer to Mr. Flynn and see if we'd have an exact number, but numerous.
Can I get an exact number?
So with respect to this type of activity, there's a broad number of investigations specific to ArriveCan. There is one investigation specific to ArriveCan.
So one general investigation and offshoots from that investigation?
Not offshoots, but if you look at the ArriveCan as well as other similar types of situations, there are many is the category I would put in. I won't give us an exact number.
Many. So more than 6?
I'll say yes.
Yes.
So that would be as precise as I can get to.
And is this in reference to contractors and subcontractors, or does it involve federal bureaucrats, and or does it involve government officials?
Specifically, I'm speaking to procurement irregularity investigations.
Okay. Again, the question put to you, is this exclusive to contractors and subcontractors, or does it involve government officials?
It involves the entirety of what needs to be looked at with respect to procurement contracts.
And I take from that the entirety could include contractors, subcontractors, the federal bureaucracy that dealt with those contractors, as well as the deputy ministers overseeing that department, and ultimately the ministers of the Crown who have ultimate responsibility. It's a catchment of individuals that potentially you're going to be looking at. Is that correct, sir?
I will not speak to any information with respect to the targets or subjects of the investigation. I will simply speak to the substance of it to give you as much information as I can today to be helpful.
Thank you, sir. I'm moving on to GC Strategies. On the eve of his call to the bar in the House of Commons, Christian Firth, one of the two owners of GC Strategies, by his definition, GC standing for Government of Canada, had his home raided. I understand this was a offshoot or a part of the RCMP detachment. It was the Sensitive and International Investigation Unit that was responsible for the execution of the warrant. How many officers were involved?
We never speak to the number of officers involved in our policing operations. We did, in that instance, take the unusual step of confirming that we did execute a search warrant.
Who was home at the time?
I do not have that information.
Can you provide that to us?
I would not provide that. Again, that would speak to details of the operation and personal information.
And what was searched?
I will not be speaking to that either. That's an active investigation. That's
Christian Firth confirmed what was searched. He actually reviewed the 6-page search warrant. And just for the education of the Canadian public who are watching this, anyone has the ability to apply for a release of that search warrant, and information to obtain. In essence, someone can apply to a court, get a court order, and actually review the content of that 6-page search warrant. You agree with me, sir?
If the warrant is not sealed, that is correct.
Right. Was this warrant sealed?
I do not have that information.
Can you provide that to us?
We can determine that, yes.
Okay. So Christian Firth confirmed to the House of Commons that basically his electronic devices were seized. And I know you can't confirm nor deny that, but he supplied that as information. Has that furthered your investigation into criminal activity involving Christian Firth?
The RCMP is exploring and reviewing all of the information, as we do in any investigation that comes into our possession with respect to investigative materials.
And the potential criminal charges as outlined in that search warrant included what?
Again, I don't have that specific information.
Are you free to give us that information?
Once I determine whether or not the warrant was sealed and the contents
Okay.
of it.
Well,
we will provide that
I'll
as
cut to
part
the
of that.
chase. According to Christian Firth, who skimmed the 6-page report, it was in relation to fraudulent billing and forgery with respect to resumes. Would that seem accurate?
Again, I won't be confirming any information contained in the document that I've not
Okay.
read.
Mr. Firth had a partner. His name was Darren Anthony. Was his home raided as well?
I will not be commenting on that. Again, that would be confirming elements of an investigation that, to my knowledge,
Would he
has-
be part of the broader search of individuals who are part and parcel of your investigation with respect to Arrive Can?
Again, I will not be confirming targets of investigation that are not already publicly known.
Has Mr. Firth been cooperative with the police?
Again, we're speaking to details of the investigation that I will
Has
not
Mr. Firth been arrested?
Mr. Chair, I'd love to keep answering these questions, but again, I hate to repeat myself. And
Has Mr. Firth been charged with a criminal offense, yes or no?
I'm not speaking to any of the details of our current investigation, but if a charge had been laid, that would have been made public.
Okay. The allegations that founded,
Afraid.
Thank
Coming back to you. Actually, I'll come back to you because I know you're next on the list. So, Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for waiting until we finished our votes today. So, Commissioner Duhem, you originally declined the committee's invitation to appear, and I'd like to read part of your letter in response to the clerk. As you may be aware, a similar motion concerning ArriveCan was put forward by the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates in October 2023. which called for the appearance of an RCMP official in respect of reports that the RCMP is investigating allegations of misconduct by 3 companies involved in the development of the ArriveCan app. The RCMP responded in writing to this request, noting that the RCMP was not investigating ArriveCan and was investigating allegations brought to our attention by Bottler AI. However, since that letter on October 2023, the RCMP has opened an investigation into ArriveCan. Respectfully, I am of the view that having an RCMP official appear on this matter would not serve the committee well, since we would not be able to comment in order to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. That said, the RCMP is committed to transparency, accountability, and integrity and remains open to the possibility of appearing at the conclusion of the investigation should that be necessary. Yours sincerely, Mike Duhem. Can you please tell us what changed your mind to choose to appear before the committee today?
Well, initially, what Mr. Chair, when it was presented, it was to discuss about the investigation itself. And the reason why we prepared this letter to the clerk was to explain that we are not at liberty to explain or to talk about any of the details of the investigation. And I wanted the community to be apprised of that and then to make an informed decision, because the last thing I want to do is waste your precious time on something that we can't really answer to. So that was the purpose of the letter. And there's another letter that follow up on the 29th that we would be more than happy to come with the understanding that, again, that we cannot talk about the specifics of the investigation.
Well, it's good that you laid the facts out for us. How do you or the RCMP, generally speaking, decide on what is when it is appropriate to speak publicly about an ongoing investigation?
Well, as Mark alluded to earlier, when charges are laid, it is before the judicial process system, and it is disclosed to the general public. And we have a responsibility when we are investigating to make sure that we protect not only the people that we are investigating, but witnesses and whatnot for fear of intimidation, and as well as making sure that we protect the investigation itself.
So how is it determined what information or evidence is able to be shared publicly?
Well, I'll let Mr. Flynn piggyback on what I want to say, but anything that would be relevant to evidence to an investigation would not be discussed. Mark?
Yeah, so there are times when we do speak about ongoing investigations when there is significant public interest, and public safety interest is usually the deciding factor in a decision to reveal publicly what we are doing with respect to a certain matter.
How does the RCMP balance the need to preserve integrity of investigations with the public's right to information?
Well, I appreciate, Mr. Chair. It's a delicate balance that we do in these high-profile files, and again, the responsibility that we have as members of the RCMP is to protect the integrity of the investigation.
Do you feel pressure from certain members of Parliament to appear before this committee or others?
Not at all, and that's why my subsequent letter came in that if you wish to still talk to us in regards to the first letter I sent with regards to investigation, we'd be more than willing to appear.
Did the RCMP feel politically pressured to open an investigation into ArriveCan?
No, we do not feel, as with any other files, there's never any political interference or pressure to open a file. In this particular case, it was brought to our attention. Our sensitive international investigation began the investigation, and then subsequently we received a letter from the leader of the opposition to investigate it further on ArriveCan, which we are doing right now.
How does public pressure weigh into the RCMP's decision on whether to investigate something?
Public pressure, we've faced public pressure in the past with the positions we take on certain investigation. And again, we look at an investigation where there's merit to it. And again, once we begin investigations, maintaining the integrity of the investigation.
Does the media play any role in your decision on whether to investigate something?
Not, Mr. Chair, not with regards to if we investigate or not, but they like to know what's going on.
when we have MPs from one political party in particular that are tweeting things such as demanding the RCMP open a particular investigation or lay charges, or that the RCMP is under the control of Justin Trudeau, how do you handle that?
So all of our investigative decisions are made completely independent of all political figures, whether they be members of parliament, ministers, prime ministers, etc. We guard our independence quite strongly, and we are not at all weak in resisting any external forces on what we investigate and don't.
Thank you. That is your time, Ms. Yip. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and thanks to the witnesses for being here today and for having agreed to our invitation. I think that the information that you can give us today, all the information you can give us today, will be very helpful. Let's take a step back and put things in context, if we may. Now, evidently, the RCMP started an investigation in October 2023. Moreover, the Auditor General learned this at the same time as everyone else, whilst she was carrying out her own audit on ArriveCan first. Why didn't you advise the Auditor General and reach out to her right from the outset to avoid duplication and to use the evidence that she was collecting in her audit on ArriveCan? Mr. Chairperson, I think it's key that we face the facts, and that is that the Auditor General has to work with her own parameters, and the RCMP works under different parameters, and information sharing doesn't occur as easily as you would intimate. Well, it should, shouldn't it? You are conducting an investigation. There may be criminal charges laid. In the case of the Auditor General, if she detects such wrongdoing, she would hand that over to you. Now, when it comes to forged CVs and fraudulent billing, perhaps she might put her finger on that misconduct and then hand the file over to you for investigation purposes response. Ideally, that would be the way things work, but in reality, police investigations are very different. We have to obtain information from various levels of governments. It's a different process for the Auditor General, a different process to the police's process. Did you reach out to the Auditor General? I didn't communicate directly with her, but we did have discussions at some point. Well, I imagine she handed the entire file over to you, including all the evidence she'd collected on ArriveCan. Response: she said that she was prepared to cooperate with us, and as I stated earlier, there's a legal process by way of which the police collect its evidence under a police investigation. I think Mr. Flynn would like to chime in.
Precision to be added. The RCMP confirmed in October that we were conducting investigations with respect to other matters, and we clarified that they were not in relation to ArriveCan. It is not until after the Auditor General tabled the report that we've confirmed publicly that we were investigating that matter. And with respect to the
Merci.
Yes, I understand. Thanks very much, Mr. Flynn. We're aware that it was the Butler AI complaints that you were initially investigating, and then when the incident grew in scope and got more and more attention, and we realized that this had to do with more than one business or company, well, the investigation was broadened. Now, the question that a lot of folks are asking, both Quebecers and those elsewhere in Canada, is the ArriveCan investigation and the additional investigations that you first alluded to, will those investigations be made public at some point? I.e., will the outcomes and findings be made public, or only the potential criminal charges? Response: well, when the investigation concludes, given the attention it's garnered, we do intend to make public announcements about what has been determined. Now, were there to be charges laid, the court documents are, of course, able to be disclosed, and those that are not able to be disclosed can be obtained under an Access to Information ATIP request. Now, our plan is to proceed in that manner at the conclusion of the investigation. Do you have a sense of when that might occur? I'm talking about the overall ArriveCan investigation, and I imagine that the other parallel investigations, and you can't name names, but I'm sure there'll be different timelines for them. But what about the overall ArriveCan investigation? A timeline, please. Response: it's difficult to put to give you a specific timeline. For example, cell phones 20 years ago phones 20 years ago used to just be telephones. Now they're smartphones, and it's a world of difference. So it's not just in interviewing one person. Sometimes when we interview one person, we end up having to investigate a further 10 people. So it's difficult to set a timeline. Well, what do you have a ballpark sense? End of the year, 3 or 4 years? Well, it depends on the complexity of the investigation, and that can vary from day to day. I can assure you that we have the adequate resources to address the complaints that have been made. Question: so you have no real sense whether it's towards the end of the year or early in 2025? Listen, I'd be speculating, as I said earlier. Things can change overnight in an investigation. Well, sometimes speculation is better than nothing, says the member, but I imagine I've run out of time almost. No, not enough time for another question. Well, I'll tack on that additional time to your next round.
Pardon me, Mr. Green. Nice to see you again. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I had so much fun the last time I was here. I thought I'd come back. I would like to open my round, however, with a notice of motion that, as per the usual practice of the House of Commons Standing Committee, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts shall not meet during the Parliament's summer recess unless the requirements of a 106.4 of the standing orders are met. So that's a notice of motion that I have now put on the table, and I will continue with my round. Thank you very much. Commissioner, the Auditor General found, finding 1.50 of her report, that multiple amendments were made to those non-competitive professional service contracts, and approximately half of the contract amendments extended the contract beyond the original period, which prevented or delayed opportunities for other contractors to compete for work. These amendments also resulted in additional cost. Additionally, we know that GC Strategies had falsified resumes, provided inflated task or authorizations to the government, and it's possible that there have been a duplication of the task or authorizations to claim for higher billing. Is that part being investigated?
Again, I'll refer to what Mark mentioned earlier, that I'm not going to comment on any of the avenues that we're actually investigating.
Sir, you implied that you're investigating not ArriveCan, but an expansion of the Bottler allegations of what those allegations were. So can you expand a bit more on this for the interest and understanding of Canadians?
Mark? Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll answer that. That's okay.
Let's have him take a first crack at it, and then if he doesn't answer it correctly, you can answer it after that. How about
So,
that?
Mr. President, Mr. Chair, as you know, it was referred to us by the CBSA through Bottler AI, and then ArriveCan came in after that, and there are multiple other complaints that were made that we are currently investigating. And I'd invite Mr. Flynn, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair, to add to my response.
Yes, to add some precision to that, all of the additional investigations I referred to earlier are not specific to ArriveCan CBSA or the Bottler AI matter. They are broader procurement matters that, as you can understand, as there's more attention in this space, that there are additional investigations and complaints that come to our attention.
Okay, well, it was testified in Mr. First's House of Commons appearance that Diane Daly, a CBSA official and former procurement manager, helped GC Strategies to write the RFP that they eventually won. So are you investigating that?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the investigation. This came up through a committee. I'm not at liberty to explain any further with regards to our criminal investigation.
In March 2022,
Ms. Daly sent an email to Bottler demanding that they turn over all their records to Dalian and Cordedix, even though they had no contractual obligations to do so, documents that were evidence of misconduct. Have you seen any additional indication that certain officials went out of their way to mess with the evidence of misconduct?
Again, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to speculate or even respond to any questions that's pertaining directly to the investigation.
Well, I'll keep asking the questions, and you're here. I'm a guest. I have a little bit of time left. According to you, Commissioner, would it have been possible for a company like GC Strategies to operate without support from government insiders and networks?
Mr. Chair, that's not for me to answer.
I'll try an easy one for you. How did you decide that the report warrants an investigation?
We received, Mr. Chair, we received a complaint, assessed the complaint, and began our investigation.
What's the difference between a review and an investigation?
As soon as we get a complaint, it's an investigation.
How long did it take for you to decide to investigate?
Mr. Chair, I don't have the exact timeline. I can go through some of the timelines that we got from the time we got the complaint.
When did you receive the allegations from the bottler?
It was from CBSA. It was January 31st, 2023.
And when did you apply for, when did you start an investigation process?
I don't have the exact time the next day. I don't have the exact information on that, but it would have started subsequently after the complaint.
According to your investigation's mandate, what would be considered criminal activity in this case?
Well, I'm not going to refer to this specific case, but any investigation that we do, there's a series of offense under the criminal code that could apply to investigations that we do.
The Auditor General in her report said she found no evidence to show that some CBSA employees complied with the agency's code of conduct by disclosing that they had been invited to dinners and other activities by contractors. Mr. Cameron McDonald and Mr. Anthony Atuno have been named in the GC's insider contracts. Are you investigating their associations and their contact throughout the ArriveCAN project?
Again, Mr. Chair, this is part of the investigation. I'm not going to comment on.
I believe those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Beginning our second round, Mr. Barrett, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Commissioner, you confirmed that the RCMP raided the home of Mr. Christian Firth of GC Strategies, and you took the unusual step of informing the public of that search. Why?
Mr. Chair, I can answer that. That decision was based on the fact that it had been revealed publicly and that there was public visibility in front of that location that demonstrated the RCMP was there. So at that point, it becomes a fool's errand to attempt to cover the fact that we were there and that we were executing a search warrant there.
So are you able to take us through the scene? If Mr. Firth was present, Mr. Firth told us that the RCMP searched digital devices. Is that true? Are you able to confirm that that's in fact what happened?
I am not able to confirm at this time.
So Mr. Brock asked you before, I want to cover these questions again. Has Mr. Christian Firth been arrested?
I'm not going to confirm that.
Has he been charged?
As I stated earlier, if Mr. Firth had been charged, there'd be a public record of that.
So is there a public record of any charges being laid in relation to your investigation into the ArriveCAN matter?
Not that I'm aware of.
We're in possession of an access to information document. It's A2023-00306. It's a memorandum for the clerk of the Privy Council from that department, from the PCO for the Prime Minister. The documents state that in January of 2023, the Prime Minister requested briefs related to ArriveCAN. Is the RCMP aware of those briefs?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any briefs.
So the document, Commissioner, goes on to say that the Prime Minister raised the issue of ArriveCan with the clerk of the Privy Council. Is the RCMP aware of those conversations and their contents?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of any conversations with Prime Minister and PCO as well as the contents.
So if it's helpful to the RCMP, I'd be happy to furnish you with this ATIP. Would you like it?
Again, it doesn't involve us. We want to make sure that any document that's brought into investigation is done properly. So you could keep the ATIP for now, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that those diligent folks from your agency who are behind you there caught that ATIP number when I offered it and can access that file. In the Auditor General's report, she noted that she referred information related to the cozy relationship of CBSA officials and certain vendors to the RCMP. Is that being investigated, Commissioner?
Again, Mr. Chair, we have multiple investigations ongoing based on information that were collected, so I'll leave my answer to that.
So it's important for Canadians to know if senior officials from the Liberal government are being investigated for criminality because there's been a reference made to you by an independent officer of Parliament. You said that you're unable to tell us who is the target of any of your investigations. So my question is this: if the evidence leads you there, will you commit to Canadians to interview any senior government official, including any minister, including the Prime Minister, if those conversations or interviews would be germane to your investigation?
Well, Mr. Chair, I can commit that our team will follow every single lead of investigation evidence and interview the people who we must interview in our investigation.
So that includes that would include anyone, including senior government officials or elected officials.
That, Mr. Chair, would include anyone.
On the topic of documents, Min Doan, who's the Chief Technology Officer, is alleged to have destroyed thousands of documents related to ArriveCan. Are you aware of those allegations?
Mr. Chair, I am not. I'd have to defer to Mr. Flynn, see if he is aware.
Again, that would be a matter that would or could be part of an ongoing investigation, and we would not be speaking to that today.
Could you tell us, with my last question, what penalties the intentional destruction of documents that are the subject of a criminal investigation, what are the potential penalties that someone would face if they were charged and convicted?
So in the context that you're asking the question, I believe it'd be inappropriate for me to get into details. However, I can very cautiously move outside of the context of the question, if you'll allow me to.
Please.
And say that anyone that takes any steps that thwarts a criminal investigation can face consequences for doing so. There are numerous offenses that could be applied in those situations, including obstruction. But I do not answer that in the context of the initial question. I just simply say, to try and aid you in your work today, that any destruction of documents that are relevant to a criminal prosecution with intent to interfere with that could face criminal consequences.
Thank you very much. Next is Ms. Bradford. You will hold for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being with us today. Commissioner, you mentioned earlier that the leader of the Conservative Party sent you a letter demanding that you investigate ArriveCan. How does that impact your independence, and how did you respond to that letter?
We, Mr. Chair, upon receiving the letter, he responded to Monsieur Poliev with regards that we are assessing all the information part of the overall investigation.
Can you provide members of this committee with a copy of that letter and your response?
I'd have to follow up with the team, yeah, if I can, yep.
Okay, thank you. Now, given the nature of what's been happening in the media and the questions that have been asked today, do either of you feel it's appropriate for the Leader of the Opposition or other political officials to attempt to interfere with the RCMP's independent work in investigations like this?
So, Mr. Chair, I would say that no one should interfere with the work of an ongoing investigation, regardless of the police organization that's leading that investigation.
Now, I've seen some allegations from some Conservative members that the RCMP is at the beck and call of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Is that true?
No, it's not, Mr. Chair. We have complete police independence since I've been in the chair, in my previous chair as well. The only dealings I've had with the Prime Minister or the Minister or other ministers is briefing on files, and I would say that it's more or less a one-way briefing more than anything else, and answering questions.
Okay, thank you. So as I'm sure you're aware, the committee voted to bring GC Strategies co-owner Kirsten Firth before the bar of the House of the Commons after he refused to answer questions here at the committee. Mr. Firth has stated that he did not want to or feel like he was able to answer certain questions specifically because of the RCMP's ongoing investigations into ArriveCan. I'm wondering if you could please explain to the committee, how does the RCMP deal with the concept of parliamentary privilege in parliamentary proceedings?
Well, it's Mr. Chair. It is a factor that we must contend with when we lead an investigation, and we usually consult with some subject matter experts into the field to see what can be used, what not can be used. But it does pose a challenge as when we deal with this type of investigations.
So how does that work then, given that witnesses are protected by parliamentary privilege and the responses or information they provide cannot be used against them in a criminal investigation? What is the RCMP heard something in the committee testimony that relates to an investigation? Are you forced to find this information in another way then?
In most situations, I would say yes, we would be forced to find it another way due to the protections that you articulated, but there are so many variables to that would take a very highly skilled legal expert to analyze and give exact answers to that in those varying situations.
If I may add, Mr. Chair, to your answer, everything we produce in a criminal investigation must be disclosable and obtained legally. So this is sometimes a challenge for us when it comes to parliamentary privilege.
I understand. So to avoid this situation in the future, how can we ensure that witnesses feel safe and secure enough to be able to speak honestly in committee or other parliamentary proceedings?
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I have to think about that one. How do we provide that safety net for the individuals that come so that they feel protected and whatnot? Mark?
And I think that's really a question that each individual would have to answer with their own legal advisors and potentially with advice from this committee's legal advisors.
I'd like to ask you a question about classified information and how it relates to ministers of the Crown and the Security of Information Act. Minister LeBlanc recently mentioned in a scrum that he'd ask you, Deputy Commissioner Flynn, what would happen hypothetically if he were to release classified information publicly. He said that you responded saying that the minister would be subject to criminal prosecution. Is that true?
That is correct. And what I stated was that anyone who reveals classified information is subject to the law equally. And obviously in this case, those names are classified at this time, and to reveal them publicly would in fact be a criminal offense.
Thank you. So there's many rules and parliamentary procedures to adhere to as members of parliament, one of them being that you cannot do indirectly what you can't do directly. When you put out a tweet and say that the RCMP or law enforcement agency must do this or that, or insinuate that the RCMP lacks operational independence of the RCMP, one could argue that they could be indirectly trying to influence the RCMP. Could you share your opinion on that, Commissioner?
Well, one can argue, but our investigators across the country are very professional. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we will follow the information, the evidence to lead us to the potential charges and whatnot.
Thank you. I'm afraid that is the time, Ms. Bradford. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés pour 2 minutes 30 secondes.
2.5 minutes plus a few extra seconds. Now, you said the Auditor General was prepared to cooperate with you, but it's my understanding that you didn't ask for all of her files. And yet, this committee got wind of certain information, for example, a list of officials and public servants who accepted invitations to events, whereas it clearly violated the code of conduct. For example, and this can give you a sense, of who's implicated with GC strategies among public servants, this kind of information that was sent through to the committee, is that the kind of information that you'll be going after using your own means, given that the Auditor General, knowing full well that the Auditor General has already done that work? Response. Well, when it comes to a criminal investigation, we have our own processes, and that evidence must be collected in a legal manner. Now, of course, anything collected by a parliamentary committee is subject to parliamentary privilege. Now, as I answered previously, it's sometimes a complex affair to get your hands on evidence when things are protected, for example, by parliamentary privilege. Question. I'm sure that if you asked the committee's permission to share the information with you, as we've done in previous occasions, the committee would have no issue providing you with the information that you require. Moreover, it makes me think this. Given the Arrive Can saga and your decision to cast a broader net than Butler AI and a general investigation of Arrive Can, did you listen to the proceedings of parliamentary committees? Is our work in some way helpful to the investigation led by the RCMP? Response. Of course, your work can always be helpful and useful if that information and evidence is permissible. Now, when parliamentarians are able to provide us with information, well, there's a whole issue of police independence. Now, that documentation that is submitted to us has to be done in an official manner so that when charges are laid and it goes to court, it must be legally permissible. Question. I know that you can't speak to specific evidence, but Mr. David, you admitted to some journalists that he had accounts abroad, offshore accounts. Is that the kind of situation where you can monitor those accounts, numbered accounts both in Canada and abroad, to determine whether there's illegal activity? Is that what you're doing as part of your investigation? Response. Well, in our investigation, all avenues are explored. And if a door is opened when it comes to information abroad, whatever information that may be, we take the appropriate steps. You're talking about accounts in tax havens as well? Yes, on the proviso that it falls within the purview of our investigation. Thank you.
For 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's clear, and particularly the many series of meetings we had in relation to this work, and we've also, of course, summoned Mr. Christian Firth under contempt of Parliament to answer questions that he failed to in another committee. It's clear throughout this process that we've investigated several instances over a long period of time, but this has been, I think, a shocking case to Canadians. But I think it's important to note that this work and what's happened in Parliament, particularly with Procurement Canada, has been really troubling. And I think this is one of the cases that is being highlighted. But I think what's here is a really deep concern I have, a systemic concern, a concern of systemic corruption that takes place in Procurement Canada. We notice this in this particular instance, but we've seen it several times, and we know this because these actors are some of the same actors that have been involved in Procurement Canada since as early as 2011. GC Strategies, for example, was a tenure to contracts by the government even before the Liberals were in power. They went unnoticed at that time, changed their company name when the election was called, and then when the Liberals took power, changed their name to GC Strategies. So we see these same actors, these two-person companies operating under the former government, operating under this government. We see this kind of behavior of contracts that become huge webs, these massive webs of subcontracting where even task authorizations are amended several times. At what point did the RCMP think of or open investigation or have any comments on this systemic nature of contracting, which seems to prefer certain actors versus others, particularly when it comes to non-competitive contracts? Do you have comments on that?
So, Mr. Chair, I don't have any comments on the procurement process itself. All I'm here for is to explain that we are investigating several files, from the first complaint that came in to the second one and others, that, as Mr. Markland mentioned earlier, pertaining to
Are you
procurement.
doing these investigations, would you say? How, since as early as you can remember in your work, has Procurement Canada been involved in these types of illicit contract practices?
I wouldn't be able, Mr. Chair, to respond to the question as to how long have I known or been involved in investigations of this nature. So,
Has there been similar investigations of this kind in previous?
Mr. Chair, I would have to go through our filing system to look at how many files we've looked at the procurement.
Would you say there's a pattern of this type of behavior?
Mr. Chair, that's not for me to determine if there's a pattern or not.
My last question, while we have this round, is in relation to the fact that this is a very public case, and we know that there's been political attempts, of course, to benefit from this very egregious situation. Has there been any instance that you can direct to this committee of any attempts of interference in your investigation?
To my knowledge, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, I should say that I am not aware of any interference whatsoever, being political or other means.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Turning now back to Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes, please.
Commissioner, you said you're investigating the ArriveCan scandal, the Arrive scam, because of the Auditor General's report. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, you would say, Mr. Chair, that it initiated in January 31st, 2023 with the referral from CBSA when it was Bottler AI, and then it grew from there.
Okay. So the Bottler AI investigation caused you to open an investigation into ArriveCan. It was not a reference from the Auditor General?
I'll ask Mark if you can clarify, but initially the complaint that was received, or the referral that was received to us or sent to us, was with regards to procurement process in general. And then...
Yeah, it's difficult to be precise on the timing of which elements, because when we have different sources of information coming in that generated the start of it, we can follow up, but again, likely that detail will be something that the investigators will not want to be made public, so we can follow up.
So you have the work of the Auditor General, that report. You have multiple other investigations that are being pursued through officers of Parliament. We have the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner, the Information Commissioner, the Privacy Commissioner, of course, the Procurement Ombudsman completed a report, completed an investigation. The Lobbying Commissioner has received complaints and information related to this file. Have you been working with these other investigatory bodies?
The challenge that we have, so the question was asked earlier of a similar nature. The challenge that we have when we're involved in criminal investigations is that there are procedural rules, legal rules, privacy rules, and different rules with respect to criminal liability depending on which process you're in. So when we look at it from a law enforcement perspective, something that the Auditor General or Parliamentary Committee may be able to compel someone to come and speak to, they are protected in doing so in some of those processes, or there may be a determination later that the person did not provide that information of their own free will, and therefore we can't use it. There are times where that actually creates significant challenges for our investigation, where we will learn something, can't use it, and then there are subsequent questions about how we are pursuing certain investigative avenues that are based on a process that's not fair to the accused.
Have you requested or received documents from the government in your investigation of the $60 million Arrive scam?
Again, that relates to details of our investigation that we won't be speaking to, and I don't have all of that information to provide that detail, even if it did not.
So we've seen the government hide documents and information from the RCMP before, including in the Prime Minister's illegal vacation to Billionaire Island and his SNC-Lavalin scandal, where cabinet confidence was invoked to protect what is a political problem. If you're met with the same obstruction in this case, what will the RCMP do to recover that information, or is cabinet confidence just the end of the road?
So I'm not confirming whether or not there was any claims of any privilege on this, so just to be clear on that. We pursue all the legal rights that we have in our investigations to gather all the information that we can lawfully obtain.
So, Commissioner, we heard shocking revelations about the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, otherwise known as the $1 billion Green Slush Fund, that the $319 million tax dollars had been appropriated where conflicts of interest were indicated. This is found in the Auditor General's report. Are you aware of these findings? A quick yes or no, if you could, please.
Not in the finest detail there, Mr. Chair.
The House has ordered that the documents, the work product of the Auditor General, the documents from Sustainable Development Technology Canada, the documents from the Industry Minister, all be delivered to the Parliamentary Law Clerk and delivered to the RCMP. I have two questions. Do you undertake or commit to reviewing the information that's presented to you following this order of the House? And will you update the public, commit to updating the public with what the outcome of that review is?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of the discussion that took place or if there's an appetite to share it with the RCMP. I would say that I am open for a review, providing that the information that we receive can be disclosed and obtained in a legal fashion. So if there is a follow-up to do, that we can do the proper follow-up.
Thank you very much. Up next, Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I'll start by perhaps just saying what's on the mind, I think, of a lot of people. It's becoming increasingly disturbing watching individuals question the operational independence of law enforcement in this country. Just earlier today in Ethics Committee, the Conservative MP for Brantford Brant, Mr. Larry Brock, outright questioned the independence of the RCMP by claiming that because the Commissioner of the RCMP is appointed by the Governor in Council and that they report to the Minister of Public Safety, that the RCMP has a political agenda when they act in their role. So I really do want to know your reaction as to with that type of insinuation, that the RCMP is not in fact operationally independent and is instead being governed by political interests.
So, Mr. Chair, I can confirm that the RCMP is, the operational independence exists. As I mentioned earlier, the only time I've had a chance to sit down with the Prime Minister or a minister or other ministers was to brief on key operational files for situational awareness only. Never once have we been subject to interference or suggestions or pressure to do something, and I can confirm that for 37 years of my career, from the last 6-7 years dealing at this level, I've never been asked to do anything, and I'm sure Mr. Flynn could probably add to that.
I would agree, and from an RCMP perspective, we take great pride in that, and you'll hear it in my voice whenever I've been questioned with respect to direction in the past. It is part of our training, it is part of our DNA. We have that all the way from our early careers, whether we're involving municipal council, provincial members of parliament at the provincial level or the federal. We work very independently and without influence.
Thank you for that. Now, I personally am very concerned with this type of rhetoric because I believe that it erodes and corrodes trust in our democratic institutions and in the operational independence of the RCMP. So I'm just wondering if you can perhaps help us understand how disinformation, especially coming from people that are supposed to be credible, that have a large following perhaps, how does that impact our public institutions and the work that you do, especially in open investigations?
So I have to be cautious, again, with respect to misinformation. I always like to remain neutral in all of these appearances. and to provide the information that we can without impacting what our mandate is. So I take great pride in my work. I'm here as an official to help with the committees, and we like to focus our attention to providing assistance to committees. And that's where I'd like to keep my testimony today.
I appreciate that, and I understand the sensitivity of an open investigation, and that's why I'm so concerned about the level of disinformation that is being spread, and quite frankly, questioning the RCMP's independence in this matter. So I guess my natural next step question is, if the Conservatives don't like the outcome of your investigation, will they malign your organization? Have you started thinking about what those next steps are going to be?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, our objective is at the conclusion of these investigations is share with the general public as to our findings so that we're open and transparent, which builds trust with the population. I can't comment on any comments that would be made with regards to the RCMPs.
Maybe we can talk in a hypothetical situation rather than talking specifically with respect to an open investigation, to ask, how do you deal with disinformation, misinformation being spread about your organization, and what steps do you take to ensure that your perceived independence as well as your actual independence is well known to the Canadian public?
So we often face challenges with our ability to share information about what is happening in our investigations for many of the reasons we spoke today. And then even post-arrest and when we start criminal proceedings, there are challenges. So the RCMP has a transparency website. You will see that we as officials are regularly engaging with media and with the public. You will see a lot of our members out with the public at significant events. And I'll remind everybody that this is a weekend that is on June 23rd. We will be dealing with a tragic anniversary of one of the most significant terrorism attacks against Canada. You will see RCMP members out at those events, again, talking to people, sharing information that we can. When it comes to an arrest and charges being laid, then we fall into another category where our ability to speak publicly is limited because of procedural elements in the criminal code that speak to how processes are run and the rights of accused to give full answer and defense, and that information that might impact those proceedings that is released by officials, police included, could impact that fairness and then could actually impact the likelihood that that trial will proceed against the individual. So we're constantly battling between a desire to be transparent, a desire to share with the public, and competing interest of privacy and rights of the individuals and the rights to Canadians.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Turning now to start of the third round, Mr. Genuis, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Just following Ms. Bradford's question, are you saying that revealing names in the NCCOP report would be a criminal offense?
Any name in the NCCOP report that is classified, that was revealed by an individual who had access to that information through proper means, security clearances, et cetera, would be committing a violation of the Security Offences Act.
Okay, thank you. Now, of course, the government can change security classification of names. There's a difference between changing classification, revealing classified information. But I take your point that for a person who had access to classified information, revealing that information would be an offense. What about a case where a person might imply a name? Perhaps if a person said that after reading report, they think a certain named person should not be allowed to join or remain in a particular caucus. Would that implied reference to a name be a criminal offense?
It's something that would be reviewed to determine whether or not there's an offense that's there. But it really depends on the circumstances and the detailed circumstances of how the person learned of that name.
Okay, let's say a person had received security clearance, has read the report, and then they say, you know what, after reading the report, I don't think person X should be allowed to be in caucus Y. Is that a criminal offense?
So again, that depends on where that individual did it and the classification of that name.
Suppose this individual has received security classification, security clearance to receive this information, and then they say in public, in front of a microphone, having read the report, I don't think person X should be allowed in caucus Y. Would that be a criminal offense, a violation of the Secrets Act?
Again, that would be something that we would have to look into to determine.
Okay, because there is a CBC story published on June 14th that says, after reading an unredacted report from one of Canada's intelligence oversight bodies, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he now thinks that independent MP Han Dong shouldn't be allowed back into the Liberal caucus. So I will share that information with you for your consideration. I believe very much in the importance of adherence to the rule of law, of course. Now, we have an extraordinary situation before us today. I think you'll agree it's extraordinary. We've got senior RCMP leadership before a parliamentary committee in a context where concerns about NDP Liberal government corruption have brought us to the point of having multiple different criminal investigations involving federal government corruption, multiple instances involving ArriveCan contractors, as well as other investigations. Could you just help us go through and itemize all the investigations that are ongoing involving the federal government or relationships between the federal government and external contractors?
That is not something that I have the information that I'm able to provide to you today. You're asking for a very broad number of things in that question that I don't have access to that information. And it would, in the context you're asking is about active investigations, it is not something that we would respond even if I had that information.
Okay, it's interesting that you said it's very broad, and maybe that's illustrative of the problem, right? I mean, I'm asking you just to identify all the investigations that you as the RCMP are currently conducting involving government corruption or corrupt relationships between contractors and governments, and you've told me that they're too broad a list. It's too big a list to share. Just on ArriveCan, then, if you could walk through the various investigations involving ArriveCan and ArriveCan contractors. So you said there's the main investigation that started kind of post Auditor General's report. There's another investigation involving the same contractors. How many different RCMP investigations are ongoing that involve this core group of suspect contractors?
Clarification, I didn't say in the initial part of your question, I did not say that the list was too broad. I said the question was too broad. With respect to the number of investigations specific to ArriveCan.
Sorry, I don't think the question is that. I'm just asking how many police investigations are there into government corruption? There would have been a time when it would probably have been easy to say there are none, but we're living in this different reality with the current government. So, how many investigations are currently ongoing involving government corruption? That seems like a pretty clear, straightforward question. Just how many are there? And
I think, Mr. Chair, it would be jumping to the fact with regards to corruption. We are currently investigating several files that are looking at the procurement process that could lead to an element of corruption. But at this point in time, I'm not saying that we're anywhere close to that. And again, I don't want to get into any details of.
You haven't laid charges yet, right? But there are investigations into it, right?
There's, as I mentioned earlier, there's numerous investigations, and with investigations, you can open up the criminal code. There's a variety of offense there that can be applied when we're dealing with an investigation. And again, I will let the investigation continue its pace, and any evidence that brings us forward to a criminal accusation, we will act accordingly.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Ms. Shanahan, you're next for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and I thank the witnesses for being here today. And indeed, I don't think there's a member of this committee that would seek to prevent or interfere or otherwise jeopardize the investigations that you're doing. And so that's why I'm very surprised at the line of questioning that colleagues on the Conservative side are pursuing, but maybe it's because one of the individuals mentioned is a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party. So could be that there's something to hide there, but I certainly don't want to interfere with any investigation in the case of Mr. Yo or any other person. But the reason why you were the RCMP was invited here today, and I appreciate that you did accept this invitation on the second go-around, because you made it very clear, Commissioner Duhem, that you would not answer any questions, and I appreciate that from both you and Mr. Flynn, that you would not answer any questions that could potentially jeopardize your work, but indeed that you would be here to help us as committee members to understand your general approach in conducting criminal investigations, particularly, and this is what is of interest to us here, particularly in those areas which touch on to different operations of government, of the civil service, of you mentioned earlier that the complaint first came, or the referral first came from the CBSA regarding procurement. And so I'd like to understand better how the RCMP does interact with the various independent officers of Parliament, the Auditor General being one, the Ombuds, Procurement Ombuds being another, the Commissioner of Ethics and Conflict of Interest. So is it something that you're waiting for a referral or a complaint, or are you generally surveying sort of the day-to-day?
So we are, I wouldn't use the word surveying day-to-day, but we're aware of our surroundings, okay? So we're aware when information comes to light. There are times where we get referrals from various offices and officials. I'm at a loss for the word, but different offices is the word I'll use, where they will tell us that they've discovered some irregularity and they will offer to assist. At that time, we will likely engage with advisory crowns that we have on many of our investigative units that aid us in dealing with the various complications of receiving information from different offices that have different types of authorities, including compelling authorities.
Mr. Flynn, can you explain a little bit more advisory crowns? So these would be lawyers that you're working with?
Yeah, so there are Crown attorneys as part of public prosecution services that we have access to during our criminal investigations that deal with specific legal matters that will impact the viability of a prosecution. So they're not giving us legal advice for the RCMP. They're giving us advice with respect to actions that we may take that could have an impact on the viability of a subsequent prosecution. I use that as an example pursuant to your question, because many of the different officers of Parliament have different authorities and in some cases compelling authorities to gain information that are different than and have different legal thresholds than the authorities that are available to the RCMP or police in general for use in criminal prosecutions. So if we possess such information and use information that has come from, say, for example, a much lower threshold than what we could have obtained the information, we would seek their advice as to whether or not we should receive it without a warrant, or we have to seek judicial authorization to get it through a production order or a search warrant, as some examples. And then that would enable proper judicial oversight into the process under which that information is going to be provided to us, and ensure that we get it at the thresholds that would allow for use in a prosecution and a successful prosecution could come. So again, to stress, they're not giving us legal advice, they're giving us advice with respect to the things that we may do or should not do that would impact the viability of a prosecution.
Well, thank you for that, because when I think of the Auditor General, for example, who's governed by an act of Parliament, and there are some very specific articles in that act regarding confidentiality of information received and so on. I mean, the Auditor General is very clear that she does cooperate with the RCMP, but are there are there sort of guidelines that you have worked out? In other words, does it have to be very specific what you're looking for? What are the kinds of things that help you work with the Auditor General's office?
So the answer is that it depends on the circumstances, but as I described, it's not as simple as the Auditor General or another Office of Parliament simply saying, I will give you all of my information because of the points that you raised. There are things that are able to be provided, again, without specific examples. And other things that would require additional authorities in order for us to possess them and use them in process.
I'm afraid
can we be reassured that work happens?
I'm afraid that is. I allowed lots of extra time, Ms. Shannon. The government will have another opportunity. Turning now to Madame Secrétaire Desgagnés pour 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Just to come back to my previous question about tax havens, if I may. In what context or to what extent are you capable, legally speaking, in your investigations to first go and see what activities are carried out in these accounts, perhaps tax haven accounts, and monies, for example, that might hypothetically be being funneled back to officials? How far can you go in your investigations in that regard? Response. As far as the RCMP is concerned, we cooperate with our international partners. And in the example that you just raised, if there's an account in a tax haven and it can be tied back to an individual in Canada, well, we follow that trace and the information that is required to lay charges. Of course, we have to cooperate with the country in which the account is held, and that's no easy job because, as you said, there are tax havens, but we go to great lengths to get our hands on that information. Question, is that common that your investigations take you to as far as tax havens? Response, well, I can't give you a figure on that, but yes, we investigate accounts that are held in tax havens and where there's money laundering, and that often leads us back to tax havens. Question, do those other countries cooperate with you? I'm not talking about the tax haven countries themselves, but other countries as well. Response, well, I'd have to dig up my files on that in order to respond to you faithfully and properly. And have to get back to your question, is it rare that countries cooperate or is it quite commonplace? Response, well, I don't want to go out on a limb and tell you whether it's easy or it ain't, but I'll stop there. Question, so you've never personally had cause to do this? Response, no, personally not in my career, no. And not even with regard to ArriveCan. Response, well, of course, as I said previously, we can't talk about the specifics of an investigation, but nothing suggests that this particular investigation will lead us to tax havens. But as I said, we'll follow the trace of the information, we'll continue our investigation, and we'll go where the investigation takes us. Response, well, apparently there are accounts in tax havens, and this was flagged on a number of occasions. And there's no legitimate reason to have an account in a tax haven unless they're interested, these players, in international activities and international trade and business.
Next, Mr. Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to ask a few more questions related to ArriveCan, considering this, since you're here in relation to that. How is the RCMP ensuring the integrity of the investigations that are currently underway?
So our investigation is being governed by multiple processes. So number one, we have what is referred to as a command triangle. That's an independent group of individuals who determine what actions will be taken. There is oversight under a criminal operations officer within the area that investigation is being conducted. And then from a headquarters perspective, we also have a governance role where there is regular reporting and oversight on a broad number of operations across the country. They use that for multiple purposes.
Just as a matter of time, thank you for that response. Another question is, can you elaborate on what the charges would be in general for anyone who has falsified documents, task authorizations, or overbuild the government with fraudulent information.
So in a broad context, not specific to any investigation.
Exactly.
I think you used the key word in the start of your question where you described the activity as fraud. There are potential offenses such as that.
And what would that mean? What kind of charges?
Fraud.
Oh, sorry, what kind of criminal penalty would that entail?
I would have to go back to the criminal code. I don't remember the exact penalties for,
That's okay.
for those sections.
Given that both the Parliamentary Committee and the RCMP are investigating similar issues and may end up with similar evidence, how do you protect the integrity of key evidence from being leaked, for instance?
Well,
Sorry, there's no, for just leaked.
So during our criminal investigations, there are